Our sermon topic will continue with Jesus gathering his apostles and disciples, and we will get right to that. But first, I want to take a moment and address 1 Corinthian passage this morning. It can be somewhat confusing because the author does spend a great deal of time discussing what and how married persons should treat each other, as well as remaining faithful in their praises to God. It may be a natural conclusion for some to believe that Paul is continuing with that same discourse here in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians. And that's pretty reasonable because Paul begins the chapter in his discussion about marriage and the duties of a husband and wife. Even though he was addressing how the husband and wife should live in relation to each other and in relation to God. There's a definite shift, and I believe in this section he is making a larger argument here. The overall message being, Paul is trying to convey to us that the time that we have to do the Lord's work is short. And there is much persecution for the Christian and believers in Paul's time. And he does not wish for the followers of Jesus to be distracted by the physicals of this world. He even says so in the 32nd verse, I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord. But a married man is concerned about the affairs of this world, how he can please his wife. And he says the same about the unmarried woman and the married woman. For whatever time the Lord allows us, Paul is admonishing us not to be overwhelmed by the social and material problems of the world. Rather, we are to live for the Lord in all of our circumstances. When Paul says that those who have wives should live as if they don't, he is meaning that everyone who has a spouse should live their lives for the Lord in these marriages as if they were not married. Paul implies that the married person is apt to neglect their Christian duties. Even in marriage, we are to live properly and completely and undividedly in devotion to the Lord. It's a very difficult thing for the unmarried person, and even more so for the married. Looking to the larger picture, Paul says, if life brings sadness to Christians, then we are not to be bound by these experiences. And with the same emphasis, if there are joys in our lives, we are not to be engulfed in them. Many of us are blessed with a great many material possessions. Paul warns us that we are not to cling to these possessions because they are changing. The world is changing and will soon disappear. Now, this was 2,000 years ago. But from the perspective of the divine, holy God, we are on the short end. I once heard Carl Sagan put up a calendar, and the very first second of January 1 of this calendar was the Big Bang. And on December 31st at 11:59, 59 seconds is when humankind appeared. All that time, our time is this. So in relation to God, Paul is talking about a very short window. of our human existence here. It's not to be lost in the concerns of the world. Paul is known for overreaching and putting great expectations on his believers, on the believers of Christ. But he is not asking for us to do any more than he himself does. Paul displays unwavering loyalty and dedication to praising God, and he simply expects no less from us. The way Paul sees it, we are to be just as desirous for the Lord as he is. And in fact, the purpose of this letter to the Corinthians is to encourage Christians to live their daily lives as if Christ is going to return any moment from now. We can use this advice even today in our lives. Now, for our gospel message this morning, we see Jesus has begun his ministry. In verse 14 of Mark 1, it says, "After John was put in prison, Jesus went into Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God. As he walks along the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee, he calls out to his next 4 chosen disciples. First, he calls out to Simon and his brother Andrew as they were casting their nets into the lake. 'Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men.' We are told that they left their nets at once to follow Jesus. Walking up a bit further, Jesus sees James and John in their boat preparing their nets to cast into the lake. And when Jesus calls them, they immediately get up, abandon their father and the hired men on the boat, and pursue Jesus. I'm sure the father was not very appreciative of that, but that's the way it was. We should take from this that there was no hesitation in any of the men called by Jesus so far. Everyone whom Jesus called drops whatever they are doing, and they begin their new lives following Jesus. Last week we saw Andrew and the other unnamed person immediately walk away from John the Baptizer and go to Jesus. Andrew goes and finds his brother Simon Peter, whom Jesus renames Cephas. Jesus then calls for Philip to follow him, and he immediately does so. After spending some time with Jesus, Philip also goes and finds Nathanael, invites him to come and meet Jesus. And if you remember, we ended last week with Nathanael making that snobbish-sounding statement, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" And Philip's great response, "Come and see." Today we see our 4 fishermen drop everything and instantly go to be with Jesus. They travel on to Capernaum, and Jesus goes to teach at the temple on the Sabbath. What is important for us to understand is how Jesus preaches. It said that the people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. The important difference is that the lawgivers would recite the law, saying something like, "Thus and such saith the Lord," or "The law says that you are to do this, and the law says you are not to do that." Jesus, on the other hand, spoke with authority about God and about heaven as one who had been there and who one day would return. Jesus referred to God as his Father. No one had heard anything like that before. Jesus spoke as an actual eyewitness to the glory of God. People were amazed, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees were deeply troubled. And then there's the repeated instances of the demons recognizing Jesus, claiming his holy titles, fearing for their own survival and begging him not to destroy them. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." People saw this and saw Jesus cast him out of the possessed person with just his words, and they were amazed. Later, we will see Jesus calling to Levi, the tax collectors, and just like all the rest, Levi immediately gets up and walks away from his tax collecting table and his duties, and he goes to be with Jesus. By my count, that makes 10 people that Jesus has called thus far. Next week, we will look at Jesus officially naming his 12, even to include Judas, who would betray him. And then Jesus really kicks it into high gear. And the crowds around him grow and grow. And the lawgivers plot to have him silenced. But now, ending a little differently, a parable of the fisherless fishermen by an anonymous source. They were surrounded by streams and lakes full of hungry fish. They met regularly to discuss the call to fish, the abundance of fish, and the thrill of catching fish. Got excited about fishing. Someone suggested that they needed a philosophy of fishing, so they carefully defined and redefined fishing and the purpose of fishing. They developed fishing strategies and tactics. They realized that they had been going at it backwards. They had approached fishing from the point of view of the fisherman and not from the point of view of the fish. How do fish view the world? How does the fisherman appear to the fish? What do fish eat and when? These are all good things to know. So they began research studies, attended conferences on fishing. Some traveled to faraway places to study different kinds of fish with different habits. Some got doctorates in physiology, but no one had yet gone fishing. So a committee was formed to send out for fishermen, prospective fishing places, outnumbered fishermen. The committee needed to determine the priorities. A priority list of fishing places was posted on the bulletin boards in all of the fellowship halls. But still, no one was fishing. A survey was launched to find out why. Most did not answer the survey, but from those who did, it was discovered that some felt called to study fish, a few to furnish fishing equipment, and several to go around engaging the fishermen. What with meetings, conferences, seminars, they just simply did not have time to fish. Now, Jake was a newcomer to the Fishermen's Fellowship. After one stirring meeting of the fellowship, he went fishing and caught a large fish. At the next meeting, he told his story and was honored for his catch. He was told that he had a special gift of fishing. He was then scheduled to speak at all the fellowship chapters and tell how he did it. And with all the speaking invitation and his election to the board of directors of Fishermen's Fellowship, Jake no longer had time to go fishing, but soon he began to feel restless and empty. He longed to feel the tug of the line once again. So he cut the speaking, resigned from the board, and he said to a friend, "Let's go fishing." They did. And just the two of them went fishing, and they caught fish. The members of the fishermen's fellowship were many. The fish were plentiful. The fishermen were few. I like that story. Jesus said the same thing. The need is great. The lost are plentiful. The fishermen of men are few. Amen.